A man falls from a towering height, only to miraculously land unscathed in a pool below. Encircled by a bewildered crowd, he emerges from the water to the ominous growls of massive monsters, seemingly invincible and daunting to conquer. The story began 28 years prior at Dan Forrester's residence, where a lively Christmas celebration is in full swing. Dan, a biologist struggling to find employment post his service in Iraq, bears the weight of his troubles but chooses not to dampen the festive spirit for his family. He's wedded to Emmy, and their daughter Murray is 9 years old. Masking his inner turmoil, Dan joins his cherished family in watching a football game on TV. Suddenly, a portal materializes on the field, and armed soldiers emerge, claiming to be from the future embroiled in a global conflict against extraterrestrial beings. Humanity, on the losing end, seeks aid from individuals in the past.
You are our last hope.
A year has passed. During this time, Jumplink, a worldwide wormhole device, has been sending trained soldiers to the future. However, less than 20% of them survive the ongoing war against the White Spikes, and victory remains elusive. Consequently, there's a widespread conscription of civilians in all countries, despite ongoing anti-war protests worldwide. People refuse to participate in a war that hasn't even commenced for them. Meanwhile, Dan continues his routine life. In the past year, he secures a job as a biology teacher at a local college. However, his students are disengaged, preoccupied with the loved ones they've lost to the war effort. Young minds see little purpose in their studies. In the midst of a lesson, Dan receives a draft notice accompanied by a surgically attached armband, designed to track his location and prevent evasion. With a sense of unease, Dan proceeds to his medical examination. Strapped to a chair, his hand inserted into a futuristic device, he undergoes scrutiny revealing he has only 7 years left to live under natural circumstances, alongside his prior service in Iraq. This deems Dan suitable for deployment to the future conflict. An electronic armband is surgically attached to ensure compliance. Escape means dire consequences for his wife. Emmy runs a support group for returnees from the future, witnessing soldiers return in dire states after a mere week at war. Learning of her husband's call-up, she implores Dan to flee, but removing the device necessitates aid from Dan's estranged father, James, a former soldier who harbors deep resentment toward American authorities. Dan, unable to forgive his father's abandonment in childhood, erupts with childhood resentments. James, explaining his departure as a result of post-war trauma, faces Dan's refusal to empathize, leading Dan to keep the device. Returning home, Dan bids a heartfelt farewell to his family before heading to the military base. Recruits undergo brief training, where Dan meets his future comrades, Charlie, a geothermal energy researcher, and Dorian, a veteran time traveler. Charlie suspects that only those deemed unlikely to survive until 2051 are sent, avoiding temporal paradoxes. Time travel limitations are discussed. Soldiers can only travel to the future, 30 years ahead, with no chance of reversing time if humanity succumbs. The alien adversaries, known as White Spikes, remain shrouded in mystery to avoid instilling fear in recruits.
It would become virtually impossible to fill that hunger.
Amidst the night, a distress signal arrives from the future. Soldiers urgently needed to defend the last laboratory studying the White Spikes. These monstrous creatures have located the lab and aim to destroy all specimens within. Dan and his fellow draftees are pulled into the magnetic field of the teleporter, thrusting them into 7 days of survival and combat in the treacherous future. A malfunction in the machine sends the draftees plummeting high above future Miami Beach, 3 kilometers in the air. The descent is catastrophic, and not everyone survives the fall. Fortunately, Dan lands in a rooftop pool of a towering building, where he assists Charlie before surveying their surroundings, a city left in ruins. Their commander contacts the surviving members of Dan's group, outlining plans to clear the city of White Spikes through imminent firebombing. The mission: reach the last intact laboratory, extract the scientists safeguarding critical specimens, and evacuate before the bombing begins. Entering the laboratory, they are met with a chilling sight: White Spike spines litter the area. Despite Dorian's impulsive act of collecting White Spike parts, the grim reality sets in. The scientists cannot be saved. They must swiftly locate the test tubes containing vital biomaterial and evacuate before the monsters close in and the bombardment commences. A mere 6 minutes away, Dan locates the necessary items and guides his team out of the building via the stairs. Proceeding cautiously, they remain vigilant, yet the White Spikes manage to track them down. Despite their best efforts, the soldiers find themselves outmatched as the monsters prove invulnerable, claiming casualties among their ranks. Dan valiantly covers the group's retreat, but his shots prove futile against the relentless assault. In a decisive moment, Dorian steps up to assist the commander, armed with crucial knowledge of the White Spike's vulnerabilities.
Necks or the bellies. It's the only lethal part on that body. Let's go!
The soldiers successfully flee the building, but the White Spikes persist in their pursuit. Just as Dan's team begins to feel relief at the arrival of an evacuation group, the monsters launch an assault on the rescuers, rendering their vehicles inoperable. Despite the chaos, Dan and his team fend off the white spikes more effectively. However, with fighter jets already bombing the city, their survival prospects appear grim. Yet Dan's concern extends beyond himself. He is determined to save all the soldiers. Despite significant losses, the team narrowly escapes. Dan regains consciousness at a forward operating base in the Dominican Republic. Among the survivors are Dan, Dorian, and Charlie. Dan is summoned by the command, while the others are reassigned to a different unit. Meeting the commander who led the Miami mission, Dan is taken aback to find his grown-up daughter, Murray, in charge. While she expresses gratitude for Dan's bravery on the mission, there's an underlying discomfort in their reunion. As a colonel focusing on bioresearch, Murray has little time for sentimentalities, especially with humanity facing imminent extinction. Despite having a compelling reason to bring her father into the future, Murray keeps it undisclosed for now. Murray presents Dan with an image of the queen white spike, far more perilous than the males and nesting underground. While Murray has developed a toxin to eliminate the males, finding a solution for the females remains elusive. She assembles a team to capture the queen, aiming to develop a toxin to neutralize her, humanity's last hope. Dan is invited to join the hunt. During the helicopter journey to the female's nest, Murray recounts to her father how the white spike invasion commenced. Emerging seemingly out of nowhere in 2048 in northern Russia, their arrival went unnoticed. The white spikes swiftly commenced their destructive path, decimating everything in their wake. Within 3 years of conflict, only 500,000 humans survived. Uninterested in power or wealth, the white spikes harbor a distinct agenda concerning humans.
We are food, and they are hungry.
The helicopter maneuvers toward the cave housing the female white spike. Despite being sedated, she puts up fierce resistance, making it challenging to contain her. Murray descends into the cave to assist her team. They strive to restrain the white spike's tentacles to prevent her from launching spikes. Murray takes a shot at one of the tentacles, grabbing the attention of the female, who charges at her with a furious cry. Hearing the creature's call, male white spikes converge on the cave. Unable to stand by, Dan defies orders to stay in the helicopter and rushes into the fray inside the cave. His timing couldn't be better. The female white spike is poised to unleash spikes at Murray and attack her. Dan intervenes just in time, diverting the tentacle away from his daughter and engaging in a fierce struggle with the creature. Finally, they manage to subdue the female and confine her in a cage, swiftly airlifting it away before the approaching males can interfere. Spotting a Humvee, Murray and Dan fend off the white spikes and make their escape. Upon reaching the coast, they find refuge and signal for the helicopter. Murray is visibly displeased with Dan's disobedience, having instructed him to remain in the helicopter. In a moment of frustration, she discloses what transpired in the part of his life he hasn't yet lived. It's revealed that he left the family when Murray was just 12. Dan struggles to come to terms with this revelation, as he cherishes his family deeply and aspires not to repeat the mistakes of his own father. However, the harsh truth is laid bare. Dan perished in a car accident when Murray was 16. The revelation pains her to recall, and she harbors resentment toward her father for leaving them. Dan is left speechless. The helicopter transports father and daughter to the last surviving offshore oil platform. In the laboratory, Murray studies the female white spike. To keep her calm, she administers a massive dose of tranquilizer every hour. Murray extracts biomaterial from the female, aiming to develop a toxin capable of neutralizing her. She synthesizes the substance, yet none of the variants prove entirely effective in eradicating all the creature's cells. Determined, Murray resolves to spend the entire night concocting various toxin combinations, hopeful that at least one will prove successful. Otherwise, humanity's survival hangs in the balance. Dan assists his daughter, unwavering in his belief in her abilities. Murray has devised a plan for using the toxin, and she needs Dan's assistance. However, she withholds the specifics of how he can help for now. Tomorrow marks the end of Dan's 7-day service in the future, and the device on his hand will automatically return him to the past. Time is running short for him to save the world while in the future. As morning breaks, Murray's progress remains modest, leaving her deeply disheartened. She finally reveals to her father why she brought him to the future. If she can find a suitable toxin, she intends to entrust it to Dan. He'll return to the past and initiate mass production of the toxin to eradicate the white spikes, securing humanity's survival.
And then you can stop this war from ever happening.
As Dan will depart from the future, Murray, now an adult, will face a grim fate as the white spikes threaten to annihilate her and everyone else. Dan vehemently opposes such a cruel outcome, but with no other viable options in sight. Finally, Murray succeeds in synthesizing a potent toxin capable of vanquishing both male and female white spikes. However, just as she completes the toxin, the queen awakens and summons the males, who converge upon the base from all directions, breaching the defenses. Amidst the chaos, soldiers defend the base while Murray retrieves the vial of toxin, intending to evacuate with Dan via helicopter. With only 8 minutes remaining until Dan's automatic return to the past, they must act swiftly. Despite the white spikes breaking into the building and decimating the laboratory, Dan, Murray, and the precious toxin make their way to the helicopter amidst fierce resistance. Fighting off the relentless onslaught of monsters, father and daughter inch closer to safety. As the countdown to Dan's return to the past reaches 4 minutes, tragedy strikes. Murray is struck by a white spike. Dan supports his wounded daughter, helping her reach the helicopter pad. However, the explosion renders all helicopters inoperable, leaving Murray unable to proceed. With tears in her eyes, Murray seeks forgiveness from Dan for everything she said during their tumultuous journey. She expresses her love for her father and reminisces about the happiness of their childhood memories. Entrusting the toxin to Dan, Murray makes one final request.
You need to make sure this never happens.
In a heart-wrenching moment, a white spike lunges at the girl, engulfing her in the creature's gaping maw. Dan, driven by an instinctive need to protect his daughter, makes a desperate leap after her, only to be whisked back to the past at that very instant. Haunted by grief and despair, Dan finds himself shattered and unwilling to entrust the precious toxin to anyone. To his dismay, he learns that returning to the future is no longer an option, signaling the triumph of the white spikes. Upon reuniting with his family, Dan grapples with profound loss and a newfound determination to safeguard his daughter's future. He confides in his wife, Emmy, revealing the harrowing events he experienced. Emmy agrees they must uncover the white spikes' initial arrival on Earth and eradicate them without delay. With no reported landings in 2048, they surmise the white spikes must have arrived earlier. Pooling their resources, Dan seeks out fellow survivors, Dorian and Charlie. Together, they embark on a quest to trace the white spike's arrival on Earth. Utilizing Dorian's white spike claw and Charlie's expertise in soil research, they unearth clues pointing to a volcanic eruption on the China-Korea border in 946 AD. The volcanic ash, preserved under the ice, suggests that the white spikes arrived a millennium ago and remained dormant until the ice melted in 2048. Now, Dan's team faces an urgent need to reach Russia and neutralize the white spikes. However, the American government declines to offer assistance. All efforts are redirected toward quelling the riots among the relatives of those who did not return from the future war. Faced with the government's refusal to aid them, Dan knows exactly whom to turn to for help. His father, James, harbors a profound resentment toward authorities and happens to own an airplane. Despite the circumstances, James agrees to fly the team to Russia. The soldiers who arrived from the future synthesized as much toxin as they could. Now they are ready to fly with Dan to Russia. Upon arrival, the group procures snowmobiles and begins scouring the icy terrain for any signs of geothermal anomalies. After an arduous search, they stumble upon a peculiar magnetic field. With determination, the friends blast through the ice and unveil a cave housing an alien spaceship. A palpable sense of unease grips them, knowing that real horror lurks within. Nonetheless, the team resolves to take action immediately.
I guess we're gonna cut that son of a bitch open and shoot anything that looks sideways at us.
James and Charlie remain outside to intercept any monsters attempting to flee the ship, while the others venture inside. Surprisingly, the vessel is not under White Spike's control but operated by another alien race. Apparently, they were transporting White Spikes as a weapon of mass destruction to another planet. Exploring further, the group discovers cocoons housing dormant White Spikes. Swiftly, they inject the creatures with toxin. Despite their protests and squirming, the White Spikes succumb to the toxin's effects, leaving the remaining ones sensing danger and stirring within their own cocoons. Unfortunately, the friends fail to contain them in time, and some break free from the ship. James and Charlie engage them from the outside while Dan rushes to aid them, armed with a vial of toxin. In the ship's lower compartment lies an entire colony of White Spikes, overwhelming the friends. Forced to act, they decide to detonate the ship before the monsters escape entirely. Only Dan, James, and Charlie survive, having stayed outside the vessel. Regrettably, one female White Spike eludes destruction, roaming the snowy expanse. Dan and James embark on a hunt, tracing her tracks to a confrontation. Utilizing a jacket to divert her attention, they narrowly evade her charge. In a struggle, Dan blinds the monster with a spike during her leap, aided by his father who lends assistance with an ice pick. Hindered by blindness, the White Spike becomes vulnerable to their attacks. While James distracts her with his red liquid, Dan inflicts further injuries, culminating in the decisive injection of toxin directly into her mouth. The monster tumbles from a cliff onto a rock, disintegrating into mush. Exhausted, Dan, James, and Charlie collapse, victorious. Word of the White Spike's demise spreads globally, with American authorities claiming credit. Dan, accompanied by James, returns home, reconciling with his father and introducing him to Murray. Shielding his daughter from the truth of her alternate fate, Dan resolves to cherish his family forever, profoundly changed by Murray's presence in his life. Now he will never abandon his family. What would you do if you were forcibly sent to a war that hasn't even started in your time? Share your opinion in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.